Believe it, we're at our last chapter of our social studies unit, chapter 20. We've done so much hard work learning about the colonists, what led up to the American Revolution, and finally, the big Revolutionary War. You've done so much hard work. I want to remind you of the strategies we've used as we've read these 20 chapters. So, the first thing that we talked about when we were working a few weeks ago was that readers, before they read, they preview the text and they make predictions about what might happen. Then, as they read, they stop after small chunks and retell what they read to make sure they're understanding. Finally, they put all the chunks together to summarize the whole text. You guys became awesome at doing that. Then you also learned that another good strategy is to think deeply about the words in the text and what they mean and how they relate to the overall meaning of the story. Then, the past 2 days with me, we've talked about making movies in our minds, kind of called envisionment, right? We're visualizing what's happening in the story. We're making a movie in our minds. So, today we're going to be reading chapter 20, The World Turned Upside Down. This chapter starts off with a British mistake. Oof, okay, I'm already using one of my strategies about previewing the text and making predictions. Let's see what happens. What kind of mistake will this be? A British mistake. The Great Britain made a mistake that cost it the war. The general in charge of the British armies in the South was Lord Charles Cornwallis. Cornwallis spent a year chasing the Continental Army in the South. All right, also I'm going to focus on my big question. How does the chapter title explain the outcome of the American Revolution? So the outcome, that's how it ended. So the world turned upside down. How does that explain how this war ended? Let's read on. Then came the Battle of Kings Mountain along the North and South Carolina border. At Kings Mountain, the Continental Army defeated a large Loyalist force. Cornwallis realized the British plan for the South would not work. He decided to move his army to Virginia. If he could defeat the Continental Army in Virginia, he would crush the rebellion. In the summer of 1781, Cornwallis chose a small Virginian town called Yorktown for his base. Yorktown is located on the York River, which flows into the sea. At Yorktown, the British Navy could bring Cornwallis troops and supplies. Okay, so I'm using my strategies. I'm making movies in my mind about what's happening. I'm picturing this place called Yorktown, kind of where it's located, what's around it, thinking about what might happen next. Okay, now I have a picture. It says Map of the Battle of Yorktown. So this is adding more to that movie in my mind. I'm starting to really visualize where we are, okay? Normally, it's not a good idea to set up a base with a river behind you. If you have to retreat, you have no place to go. But Cornwallis felt safe there. I'm going to pause and think about what we just read. So they're saying normally it's not smart to set up right on the water because if the other forces come and they push you back, there's nowhere for you to go run and hide. It's just water. So it's really interesting that they set up this base or this fort right next to water. Seems pretty risky to me. Let's see. He had 1/3 of the British soldiers in America with him. The British Navy would bring him even more if he needed them. Okay, so Cornwallis isn't worried. Washington responds. While Cornwallis set up his base at Yorktown, George Washington was meeting with a French general in Rhode Island. The French general, Rochambeau, had brought an army to help the Americans. A large French fleet was on its way. Okay, I'm picturing that, feeling like I'm there, thinking about this large French army that's coming to help me. Washington and Rochambeau planned to attack the British armies in New York City. Then the news about Yorktown arrived. Okay, so I'm going to use one of my strategies. I'm going to stop after that chunk and retell. So it seems like even though Cornwallis is feeling so confident at his base in Yorktown, the British, George Washington has his own plans happening. He's teaming up with the French, and now they're thinking about, let's go take down Yorktown. Let's see if Washington, with the help of the French, can beat the British. Washington immediately saw Cornwallis's mistake. Forget about attacking New York, he said. The American and French armies should hurry to Virginia. Together, they had enough men to trap Cornwallis. Remember, Cornwallis is a leader of the British army. If the French fleet could get there in time, it would keep the British Navy from helping Cornwallis. Then Cornwallis would have to surrender. Remember, to surrender means to give up. In one single victory, Washington might end the war. Yorktown was 500 miles away. George Washington started his military career with a 400-mile journey. That first journey ended in disappointment. The second opportunity could be a victory of a lifetime. Okay, I'm going to pause after that chunk and retell a little bit. So Washington is realizing that General Cornwallis, if we go back to this picture, Washington is realizing that this was a big mistake setting up on the water. And now that the Americans also have the French helping them out, they're thinking, wait a minute, we definitely have enough people. We can win this battle, and you're at the Battle of Yorktown. Let's see if they do it. It took more than a month for the American and French armies to reach Yorktown. It took a few more days to dig a great half ring of trenches around the town. Remembering that word trenches we learned in another chapter. Those are kind of those deep holes that they dig so they can hide out in the trenches and feel safe underground. On October 9th, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the first cannon was fired. Okay, I'm picturing that. I'm hearing the sound in my head. I'm hearing people screaming. People are scared. I'm feeling worried. Maybe I'm starting to sweat. The Battle of Yorktown had begun. For once, General Washington had the most guns and cannons. For once, General Washington had the most men. This is getting intense. I'm going to stop after that chunk. I'm remembering in the beginning of the story that the colonists, or the American army, they had so much less experience. They didn't have as many people. They were a much weaker army. But right now, the tables are turning, right? The situation is changing. Right now, General Washington has a bigger army and more guns and cannons. If I'm Cornwallis, I'm going to be a little bit nervous. Let's see what happens. Cornwallis looked to the sea for help. None came. The French fleet had driven off the British fleet. Cornwallis's army was on its own. So I'm going to make a picture in my mind about that. I know that a fleet, that's talking about something in the water. So I'm guessing that the British, they had people coming to help them in the water. But because we have the French helping out the Americans, the French went in and said, we'll take care of that British fleet. And they made them go away. So now Cornwallis is all on his own. Let's see. Each day, Washington moved his army closer, tightening the half ring around Yorktown. Washington rode among his men, despite the risk that a bullet might strike him. His soldiers cheered and pressed on. Cornwallis was trapped. For several more days, American cannons roared. Finally, the British general saw that it was useless to continue. On October 17th, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. I'm going to reread that sentence. It's really important. On October 17th, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. And it's so important that there's a picture. I know the word surrender means to give up. The American Revolution ended soon after the surrender at Yorktown. So the British are giving up. The war is about to end. Let's see how it finally ends. 2 days later, the American and French armies formed two long lines. The defeated British forces marched between them and left the town. As they did, a British Army band played the tune of a nursery rhyme. A strange tune to play at the time like this, but the words made sense to the British. Okay, let's read this little song they sang as they left. If buttercups buzzed after the bee, if boats were on land, churches on sea, if ponies rode men, and if grass ate the corn, and cats should be chased into holes by the mouse, if the mama sold babies for half a crown, if summer were spring and the other way round, then all the world would be upside down. Wait a minute. First, let me check that vocabulary word. Half a crown, that phrase. A unit of money used by British during the time of the American Revolution. Okay, so that's just a type of money they're talking about. But wait a minute. Then all the world would be upside down. Go back to the top. The world turned upside down. Okay, so we're really thinking about this title now. Let's read a little more. A group of citizen soldiers had defeated one of the world's greatest armies. Remember, the Americans, they were just normal citizens. They didn't have training. A group of colonies had won independence from a mother country for the first time in history. The United States of America had been created. All right, the United States of America, the Americans won the war. The great British Empire had been humbled. In the peace treaty that followed, Britain agreed that the colonies were now free and independent states. This is so exciting. The British are finally saying, we agree, you're free from us. You don't owe us anything, no taxes, nothing. A final word. The American Revolution produced many heroes, such as John Paul Jones and Francis Marion. George Washington, the famous general, became known as the father of our country for his leadership during the war and after. Most of the heroes, though, were ordinary people. Their names are not written in the history books. They were the Minutemen on Lexington Green. They were the soldiers who shivered at Valley Forge. They were the men who dashed out of their swamp hideouts to strike at the British Army. This is so interesting. They're saying that this army, this American army, they were just normal people. And they didn't have a lot of experience, but they fought so hard. We really need to remember these normal people. Let's see who else. They were also the women who brought food and water to the men in battle. They were the women who took care of the wounded and the sick. They were the women who kept farms and shops running. They were the farm families who shared their food with American soldiers and the townspeople who gave them housing. They were the women, children, and old men who made weapons and gunpowder for the Continental Army. They were the children who helped produce the food and clothing that the American soldiers needed to survive. When the war was over, people everywhere asked, how could the American colonies have won a war against one of the greatest military powers in the world? The answer was not difficult to find. The Revolutionary War was won because ordinary Americans refused to lose it. Da-na-na-na. Okay, that is the end of the chapter. That is the end of the Revolutionary War. The Americans have won the war. They are finally free from Britain. They're independent. They don't have to pay taxes. They're allowed to do anything they want. They've won the war. Congratulations, Class 303. We've just learned about the American Revolution. I also want to give yourself a pat on the back for the 2 essays you wrote. You wrote 2 awesome essays during this unit. The last essays you wrote about super important people, I want you to keep those in mind and keep those in a place that's really special, because those essays were really, really important, and I think you should feel really proud of the work you've done. You learned so much about the American Revolution. Give yourself a pat on the back. Off you go to your last time of boxes and bullets, who, what, when, and where, and then you are done. Congratulations, 303.